All right, it's 12 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ann Tuma. I am the Director of Events for the Hampton Roads Chamber, and thank you for joining us today on this beautiful Friday. We are excited to partner with the Hampton Roads Society for Human Resource Management, again, I think for the fourth year on this series, and kick it off today with Managing the New Workplace in 2021. Just a few items before we get started. If everyone could go ahead and open up your browser on your phone to Poll Anywhere, this will be an interactive presentation. So we do ask that you go to www.pollanywhere.com. And then also, if you could go to the next slide, I would love to thank our sponsor. We do have a sponsor for this event, Dream Vacations. I know everyone right now after 2020 could really use a vacation. So thank you so much, Dream Vacations, for supporting this series. Thank you so much, Cynthia. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to our panel. Christina, if you'd like to go ahead and kick off the panel discussion in today's presentation.
Thank you, Ann. We are very excited to be partnering again with the Chamber. All of us here today, our speakers are either all current and or former board members with HRSHRM's Board of Directors. And many of us have enjoyed presenting this HR Department of One presentation to you guys in the past. And so we kind of continue on with our tradition of kicking off our series each year with this particular panel. We thought it would be very appropriate today to talk about, how the workplace has really changed in 2021. And I'm excited to have with me Mike Godwin, who is a VP of HR for Community Alternatives and the CEO owner of PBA Ipsum, Stacy Hawks, who's with Employee Relations for the City of Virginia Beach, Karis Richardson, who's Manager of Talent Technology for Dollar Tree Family Dollar. And then obviously I'm an attorney with Jackson Lewis here in Norfolk, Virginia. And we all bring different levels of expertise and experience, which I think kind of makes this a really fun panel. Some of us have been with large companies. Obviously, I bring a legal background. Mike has worked with a variety of different companies and is able to kind of weigh in for the small and medium-sized folks. And Stacy brings a unique perspective to kind of how those municipalities are handling some of these new issues, and hopefully give you guys a wide variety of ideas about how things are going, what people are doing, concerns that you have, et cetera. And please make sure to put your questions in the chat box. Ann is going to be paying attention to those as we present. We're going to try and address as many of them as we can. I'm going to let Mike, though, tell you a little bit more about Poll Everywhere to make sure everybody is set up to participate in this fun interactive component of our presentation.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. What you need to do, and this was in the email that was sent out before, and obviously Ann made a mention to this at the very beginning, is you can download the app, Poll Everywhere. It's a free app. Join the username mgodwin714. That's my channel, right? And because this is an interactive presentation, what we're going to do is we're going to do a number of just multiple choice polls, scattergrams. We have a pie chart that we'll do, be kind of fun. And to get as many people on there as possible and get that feedback will help us as a panel, because after we get the feedback from each question, we're going to tailor our responses to what you guys say. So if you say, hey, this is how adjusting to the new workforce, this is what we've done mainly, and we find that in the data from your feedback, we would then talk about that specifically if that's what the majority of you guys are doing. So anyways, I'll just go through the next few slides just to do the polls. And for each poll that we do, we'll do a short, say the question, we'll do a short break. And as I go through each slide, it'll automatically, if you are in the app right now, it'll automatically come up on your phone. So it may say something different right now. It may give you an intro screen or something, but automatically this first one right here should be popping up on your phone right now if you are in Poll Everywhere and everything is active. So people are already responding, which is great. Go ahead and respond. So the question is, what does your current workplace look like, right? And there are some options. So You can do it entirely remote since the actual pandemic began. A hybrid workplace with some workers coming in and others still remote, and then a never closed down or you never went remote type of situation. So give it maybe a couple minutes, just 30 seconds more or so. And then what we'll do is the panel will weigh in on the responses and talk a little bit about it. And we'll do this for the next 4 slides, which will all be within that poll everywhere model. So any other last responses before we jump into it? Just give it a few more seconds. All right, well, doesn't look like it's moving much anymore. So looks like we got a good data to work off of, with 71% of respondents are in a hybrid model right now, with some workers coming in and others still remote. And then 29% never closed, never went remote, but 0 actually going completely remote. So panel, anybody want to weigh in on sort of what you've seen in the thing? And I'll give my opinion as well.
Yeah, sure. I thought it might be interesting for us to all talk a little bit about what we're currently doing, because I'm looking at our screens or our backgrounds, and I can tell we all have we would have different responses for this potentially, just if we were answering. So for me, it's really been very interesting, because law firms are not the first employer that I would have ever anticipated being able to go entirely remote in the pandemic. If you'd asked me in 2019 if we'd ever been able to shut down and work entirely remote, I've been like, yeah, no, I'm sorry, not a law firm. We wouldn't do that. We're a national firm, and so we have a presence in almost all 50 states. And so it's been very, very interesting, because we had to grapple with, I think like many of the national employers, how do you handle or adjust complying with everything? And so as a result, we went entirely remote, with only an essential worker going into each office to pick up mail, et cetera. And it was feasible because we had a lot of the infrastructure already in place. We had already been moving to a paperless environment, and the courts had shut down. And so we were doing everything remote with the courts as well. So that's certainly my experience so far. And I'll let you guys talk a little bit.
So I guess I'll go next. So I was thinking when everybody was weighing in on the polls, I'm surprised that we didn't have anybody say they went entirely remote until, of course, Christina spoke up. And it's funny to me, because I don't know, Karis, did y'all hear, oh, everybody's remote, we can all be remote. And I'm laughing because I'm thinking I have business like Karis, so we both had essential workers, right? So municipal operations, y'all want your trash picked up. You would like your water to keep moving. And of course, police, fire, and EMS, everybody always thinks about them until the garbage is not picked up. So we had to deal with the social distancing, and how do we keep business operating at a level and that is responsive and still providing those infrastructure services that we have, because the trash has to get picked up. And so we got real creative real quick. Like Christina, we were moving toward that paper-free environment. And I'm happy to say my division is completely paper-free because we had to. And so we've done the hybrid thing. And for the last year, where we thought our organization has no appetite for this. There's just no way municipal operations will ever embrace that telework. We're having a devil of a time getting folks to come back. So we've kind of folded that into our new recruitment strategy. So if you want to work in human resources, particularly in Virginia Beach, we offer hybrid scheduling. You don't have to be here every day. So it became a kind of a forced embracing of this new world, and you had to get on with it.
Yep. That's been my experience with my clients. I have a number of clients that I consult with and talk to. And really the hybrid model's been pretty much everything. With a lot of medical healthcare organizations have been more along the lines of the never closed down, never went remote. It was sort of not even with our corporate office are we going to do this, because we want to stand by our workers. This is what I was hearing a lot from a large hospital that I work with right now. So it's it just all really depends on the model of work that they do, how they make money, right? You know, what they do. And but very few. I know of one or two companies that I can think of that went completely remote and decided to change their whole philosophy, but they really had very few employees and they could do something like that. It wasn't something hard to do.
Yeah, so being at a retailer, that frontline retailer. So when I say hybrid, there were a handful of us, and a lot of us. I'm home now at our corporate office, but our corporate office never completely shut down. You know, as Mike mentioned, it was important. It is important that we show support for our distribution centers, and really, you know, support them and are available to support them. And it is fairly easy to do a lot of our work from home, but we have been a culture that, again, it's important to show that support, and that to us culturally means physically showing up in the office every day and being available. So I was actually interested, as you know, Christina mentioned, how quickly our corporate team pivoted to be able to work from home, but that was a lot around supporting each individual associate. So we had childcare issues, we had health issues, we had other, you know, family issues that each individual, where those of us that could work from home, we were offered that opportunity, but certainly supported to continue to rotate into the office. And the vast majority of our workforce, though, you can't run a store from home, and you can't run a DC, distribution center, and get product into the stores from home. So we did have a lot, which meant we were also dealing with a lot of COVID cases and being kind of the front lines for that as well. So that was a new and different challenge that we had to face, because we weren't able to shut down the majority of our operations, or kind of in-person operations.
Yeah, and we've started to see, we've at least announced a return to work. I don't know how many of you guys are dealing with either announcing those changes yourselves or working with other companies that are. We have announced our return to work in a hybrid capacity starting at the end of this month. And I know I've talked with a lot of clients where that's kind of now on the agenda. So if they did shut down in large part, now they're looking to bring back those people that have been gone in some capacity. And I think that will be, that really is kind of the focus of what we're going to be talking about here today. So it'll be exciting.
Yep. Absolutely. So the next question, let's see if I can get over that question, is going to be a scattergram. And what this is essentially, you would type in a 1 or 2 word response, all right? And it's going to show up on the screen. The question being, what have been your biggest challenges during COVID? So this is during the actual pandemic. Examples could be engagement, safety, performance, productivity, tension, 1 or 2 word phrases. What you can say, however, is you can say anything you want for the most part. And you can get an idea of what everybody thinks. As you respond, if more than one person says something, like you see how engagement's getting bigger, that means that there are 5 or 6 people who have said this so far. And so as things go by, it will change and morph, and words will get smaller, words will get bigger based on what everybody is saying is the prominent issues, challenges for them in the workplace. So let's give this another couple seconds. Please respond.
Mike, can I just say this is fascinating to me? I love the way that this pops up. Like I could watch it all day.
This is Mike being a super nerd and having to and I know many of you know this as well, and many on the in the group may be a part of this as well. If you're a teacher or whatever it is, you got to engage your students. This is a way to sort of engage the students a little bit better too, when I do presentations in front of lectures and whatnot. So we'll give it a second, and then we'll go through. We will go through the data here. A little bit more difficult to kind of piece together. It's not percentages necessarily for the panel, but I do see one big, one big one that's really coming out. And so, obviously off the top, engagement seems to be the #1 thing for everybody, with retention, recruitment, communication, as being those things that are probably next to engagement. So anybody on the panel want to talk a little bit about engagement and your experience with engagement?
I can go first on this one.
Sure.
Engagement was problematic because it's funny, when I was thinking about it, as that word kept dancing around the screen there, which was, yes, Christina, absolutely fascinating. Everything felt fractured. The word fractured kept coming to my brain. Everything felt disjointed. We didn't have our normal rhythm because nothing was normal. And that impacted engagement. But the flip side of engagement, I would also say, is that we had folks struggling to separate work and home. We were working more because, Kara said she's at home today. She's got family at the edge of that door frame waiting for her, and she doesn't have the commute to separate the two. So engagement went both ways. It felt fractured and it felt overwhelmingly immersive, is what I would say is what we saw with a lot of our workforce. We didn't have that balance that we typically saw.
Right.
Yeah, I think something else we saw was sort of the engagement and connection to each other. Kind of got lost at that water cooler chit chat that Monday morning. How was your weekend? What did you do this weekend? What were the sports the kids were playing last night? Some of that stuff that really builds connection among us that sometimes we don't value as much, or we don't see the value in. Also, we didn't have a lot of technology with cameras, so we weren't even seeing each other in these video environments for the first kind of large percentage. And it's still not part of our culture to be on video in every meeting. So that even you lost some of that connection and true engagement with each other and really empathy for each other sometimes. And I think it was easy, Stacey, kind of to your point, where when you're here and you've got kids banging on the door or whatever the case may be, you get frustrated and you want people to understand that about your situation, but you forget that everybody else is dealing with something similar because you're so immersed in your own situation.
Very true. So I think we may have...
we've seen how to really take measures to be more purposeful.
Yeah, I mean, picking off where Karis left off, for us, I have an associate who I've literally only met once. We hired him in November of the pandemic, and I, briefly met with him at a distance for his interview. And he's been working with me since. And it's crazy because I look back on it and I'm like, I've only physically met him in person for literally a hot second. And, so I will actually get an opportunity to start working with him in person at the end of the month. And, so it's that engagement and figuring out how to engage him and how to train a new hire, a new employee from afar has been a really big challenge. And I know that a lot of my clients are struggling with that too. What are the new rules of the game for communication? How do you deal with performance issues? All of this stuff that I think we're going to talk about in a little bit.
Yep, absolutely. All right. All right, so next poll. How many of you believe you will keep a remote workforce in some capacity moving forward? So that's permanent. We're going to keep a remote workforce in some capacity moving forward. So this will change as responses come in. Wow. Let's give it a second. It's kind of cut 50-50 almost. A little bit heavier towards keeping a remote workforce in some capacity. Give it one more second. Everybody else, please respond. All right, so this is it. So it looks like a majority of people will, or majority of companies represented here will keep a remote workforce in some capacity, while a little bit less will, very close to half will go to doing away with a remote force, and it will be going away fairly soon, where it's already gone away. So panel, any thoughts about this, or just If any of your companies are looking to keep a remote workforce or a section of your workforce as permanently remote.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the same category as Stacy. Stacy mentioned that, you know, they're now trying to recruit based on the fact that they may be able to have hybrid capacity. And we've recognized at least that once we return back to the office 100%, which is anticipated to be right after Labor Day, we may still have people who want that flexible work schedule or flexible work environment. And so as a firm, we've actually announced that we are going to allow for that flexible work schedule 5 times a month. And that is, you know, wow. Like, I mean, I've been practicing law for 20 plus years. I've never been in a legal environment where we actually had a policy on that. And we do now. It just rolled out a couple of weeks ago. And so but I think that we're like a lot of employers where I think we've recognized we can, and we've largely, I mean, I think more importantly, recognized our employees want it. And I think a lot of employees are going to want this moving forward.
Absolutely. So I'm working with the company right now on keeping their entire corporate office remote from now on. They actually shut down the corporate office. They had a corporate office. It had 10 people in it. And they decided to completely shut it down and go completely remote with just their corporate office. So it makes sense. They have, meetings every week. They have departmental meetings. They have ways of staying engaged. And they may at some point go back to it. But right now, it's a huge cost saving for them because they were, paying rent. They were paying, for this part of a building, and it was just vacant for a period of time right after the pandemic. So they just said, let's just shut it down indefinitely and move forward. So. All right. Any other Karis, you can say?
I was just going to say, I think, the war on talent too is getting to a point where right now, I mean, we need to consider expanding our talent pools. And that's something that, we're running into in our corporate environment. There's not a lot of other companies like ours in Hampton Roads. And so when so many other companies are supportive of remote work, we're finding it more difficult to get people, hire people that are willing, find people that are willing to move to Hampton Roads, or that need to move to Hampton Roads to progress their career. And so that's, I think, another piece that culturally, as I said before, we think it's important to have the majority of our support team in the office and there. But from a talent perspective, I think that may be a deciding factor for us and what our, hybrid or on-site work looks like in the future.
Absolutely.
And we're fighting the same thing, Karis. We are, public sector notoriously has struggles to attract talent because we don't pay as much as the private sector. And it's just one of those things that we're going to have to compete, particularly in jobs that are transferable, HR, finance, IT. If you want to be a librarian, you're gonna be in some sort of locality, state, something like that. But by and large, if the job is portable, we have to be able to compete with Centera and Dollar Tree and the other organizations for that talent. So we don't have a choice. It's our new reality. We're offering it as an option for discussion. And so I'd be interested from the folks out there. We are doing and Karis, maybe how you guys are handling it. We're requiring folks that are new to our organization to come be part of us for a while to build that engagement that you mentioned earlier, because you do lose something. We use Microsoft Teams, so we see everybody, but there's still not that opportunity to say, hey, how are the kids? Hey, how are you doing? Whatever. And so we want them to be here, to be part of the culture before we allow that telework to take off. So it'll be interesting to see how that's handled from different places across the region as we move into this next chapter of talent acquisition.
Absolutely. All right. And our last question, another people have already started responding to this one. Another scattergram, and you can do more responses as well right now. So what is the biggest challenge you face on site post COVID. So the last one was during the pandemic. This is post-COVID. So examples of safety compliance, PPE, vaccinations, remote workforce, accommodations, just a number of different examples. So give it a second, type in your responses, and you can on Poll Everywhere, if you want to clear a response, you can delete a response and put in a different response as well. Makes it really easy to do that. So please take a second and let's see where we get. All right. Things seem to be, well, maybe not. Moving around a little bit more. I see some definite trends here. I think everybody else sees morale and vaccinations being probably the top two, compliance being up there, and schedule safety maybe, but morale, vaccinations really more than anything else. Let me start out actually this time. I'll take vaccinations, and the reason I take vaccinations is because this was a major issue with the healthcare organizations that I was working with. So one human services firm in particular had an issue in the sense that they didn't necessarily qualify for just, to get in line as a healthcare worker, so to speak, because they were a human services firm. And so, ultimately had to, I worked with a pharmacy. I got a pharmacy out of Richmond to come down and help them out, just to get a vaccination clinic going a few months ago, which was very helpful. It made it so that at least it's about 50 of their workers got vaccinated. They have about 250 employees, so that is a large part of their workforce. And at the same time, 50 employees, but also a number of other employees and another other clients that they provide services to were also vaccinated during that time. So that's, that's an example of just try your best to reach out to as many. It took probably, 100 phone calls to get to that one pharmacy that just happened to have, some extra Moderna vaccines. And now, these days, actually, it's easier from what I understand. There is more vaccine out there. There are more opportunities to actually reach out to these pharmacies directly and ask if you have a larger employer, an on-site vaccine clinic, or that type of thing. So I strongly recommend reaching out and seeing if you could do something about getting that. In addition to that, with every employer I work with, I have instituted obviously I recommended it, and they instituted a $25 gift card for vaccinations. So essentially, employees get an Amazon $25. One actually is doing a $50 gift card to get if you get vaccinated. It's kind of more the carrot than the stick, so to speak. I think Christina could talk more about the legal side of mandating the vaccine, which some employers have done, which I understand is legal if you do it the right way, right? But in terms of the carrot, offered that first, and that was wildly successful at a few of these employers I work with. So.
Yeah, so vaccinations are a hot topic for sure, Mike. I've answered many questions in the last few weeks about vaccinations, especially as most states opened up or extended to all individuals who were interested in getting vaccinated the ability to do so. And then obviously we've had, children, 12 to 15 added to the mix now. And so it's a hot topic. It has to be done correctly. And you're right. And most employers that I see are not mandating. And we can talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, but most are doing it on a voluntary basis. Many are incentivizing, like you suggested, obviously compliant with ERISA guidelines, et cetera, because it could be considered a wellness incentive plan. And so you've got some restrictions on how much you can give. It has to be de minimis, and the EEOC did issue some guidance on that. But then also, how do you just handle it? I mean, it's one thing to say we're going to encourage vaccines. Then the next question from employers has been, well, can we ask if you've been vaccinated? Yeah. And the EEOC has said, we can, But then again, there's an art to doing that, right? Like we all know that on the call. I mean, we know that, while you may say, hey, have you been vaccinated, and you do it in a private setting and someone says yes or someone says no, if someone says no, we leave it alone. That doesn't mean that a supervisor or a manager knows that, right? I mean, we're not supposed to be asking the why you didn't get vaccinated. That is unlawful. But we can ask, have you been vaccinated? And then if we're going to keep track of that information, that's a whole nother ball of wax, because it's potentially confidential medical information. So how are you doing that, right? Are you going to have HR run that? Are they able of running it right now? I mean, do they have the resources to do this? What are you going to track? What's your business reason for asking even whether they've been vaccinated and keeping track of this information? And then obviously I'm surprised I didn't see it here, but masking, right? Like masking is a big one. Here we go this morning, right? I was thinking about that before I, driving my son to school. Like we're going to probably need to talk about masking because, CDC opened up a game changer yesterday with their announcement that we don't have to necessarily mask indoors if you've been vaccinated. And so, yeah, we can talk about that in a little more in depth. I'm curious about Karis and Stacy's thoughts on these.
Especially morale. I think that's the big one right there. So
yeah, and morale's been a thing surrounding the masks and the vaccinations and the emotions that we have, fear, excitement, whatever associated with you're excited we're getting to the end. If everybody would get vaccinated, we could get rid of the masks, right? We could get back to normal. I jokingly, Christina hired somebody the week before the world lost its mind. And so we were like, well, we should get back to normal. And they were like, I don't know what that looks like. It's like, hold on, we'll show you. So, it's definitely all tied together. We have, I wish I could see Christina's face when I say this, but, the road to heck is paved with good intentions. Managers saying, hey, if you're vaccinated, put it on your ID badge and we'll know. And I'm like, no.
Great idea. Yeah. Give them
that's great. Hey, yeah.
and
idea for a defense attorney.
Yeah.
And they're problem solving, bless their hearts, right? They're just wanting to get back to normal. It's all tied together. And then respecting that personal space, or like Christina said, if they decide no, it's none of our business why. Whether they can't or won't is none of our concern. And so that's all tied up in this. So this has just been really intense. We decided that we're not asking, right? So we decided we're not going to ask because it came from that place of, I saw somebody put accommodations up there and I was like, yes, my people, because from this, I can't wear the mask. I can't wear the face shield. I can't get the vaccine. I can't come back to work. Anybody who wasn't versed in ADA before March 16th of 2020, you now have a master's degree. So it's just been an incredible learning experience that I'm ready to be done with. Because we need to get back to some place where we have the camaraderie and we're able to get the work done that we actually come to work to do. And so it'll be interesting. I keep watching when Fauci or any of those folks is going to come out with the statistics on herd immunity. You don't hear about it as much as you did in January when we started this. And so that makes me feel like maybe we're not getting there. Because at that point, then we can really all relax.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I'd just say, I think how we build morale and how we find morale is going to look very different now. I think we've sort of peeled back the curtain, if you will, and everybody's definition of what will engage them is different and their needs are different. And we've sort of opened this can of worms of, well, you can work remote. So if you don't need childcare anymore, you don't, whatever the case may be. So I think it's going to stretch our leadership muscle, I think, as we come back together and figure out what the new normal is, and how we build morale with our team, again, knowing that there are jobs and there are companies and there are cultures that are going to require people to come back into the office. And some people are super excited about that. And some people are, very disappointed about that. And so how do we kind of navigate those new waters? I think again, building morale is going to look very different than it has before. And I think we need to kind of go into that open-minded as we, again, identify what our new normal is.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so I think that is it for our poll everywhere stuff, but we do have a few other slides as well, just to give you some ideas and pointers and things of that nature. So start with, how do you bring employees back safely, right? Vaccination policy. I'm gonna hand that off to our legal counsel here. Talk about good vaccination policy.
Yeah,
Go
well, but it's funny, Mike, because when you say that, I already hear you assuming like we have to have one, right? And that's
Yeah.
right. That's the right place to start from. You
Yeah.
have to, an employer can't be like, well, we're not going to address this. You can't, right? As you're bringing people back to work, as Stacy and Karis have said, like there's a safety concern, right? There are some people that are legitimately not excited about coming. And sometimes that stems to fear of, what's it gonna be like? Am I gonna be safe? Maybe they've lost someone in the midst of COVID. I mean, it's different for everybody. So an employer has to come out and let people know what it is you're gonna do. What is your vaccination policy? Is it gonna be mandatory? Is it gonna be voluntary? Are you gonna encourage? They need to know where you're going with this. Like communication, I think we've all learned, is incredibly critical in the midst of COVID, and returning to work communication is going to be very critical too. But yeah, you should have one. And for most folks, like I said before, mandatory, it really needs to be tied to a legitimate business reason. A lot of employers said, well, why can't I just mandate it? Well, you can. And as Stacy said, we're going to lead right into accommodations, because there's no way to talk about mandating vaccinations without talking about accommodations. We were already talking about accommodations with regards to COVID exposure and people with comorbidities. But there are going to be people who can't be vaccinated. And again, what's your policy going to be? What's your practice going to be? You have to carefully think through all of that. And if you're going to mandate, I mean, are you prepared to fire everybody tomorrow who says, no, I'm not going to get vaccinated, even if I don't have a legitimate accommodation request that justifies why I'm not going to get vaccinated? Are you prepared to lose some of your star players because, they take the position they're not going to be vaccinated? So you need to have a policy at the end of the day. And, there's lots of information out there. I would say put a lot of thought into it. Get input from your legal counsel if you need help doing that. SHRM has a lot of resources on it. If, we are all members of SHRM, the National Society of Human Resource Managers. They have a great website. They've got a lot of tools out there. Our members certainly use those quite a bit. But I'm gonna hand it off to Karis and Stacy too, and let you guys weigh in.
Sure, I'll go first. Yeah, I think really, Christina, I think you summed it up really well. Is, have a policy, but remember that there are people at the other end of that policy, and so we've all got to, again, lead with compassion. But a policy is a policy, and we do have to enforce it fairly and equitably. So have one that has been legally vetted, and then be prepared to support it.
And to, of course, amening everything everybody else said by saying, it needs to be appropriate for your business, not simply because we think it's a good idea. It's never an employer's place to make personal decisions for your staff. If you're in a healthcare setting, maybe there's a valid business reason. If you're in a retail setting where there's high probability of contact with individuals, there's a valid business reason. So taking that emotion and making sure that it's backed up by business fact, it's going to get your legal counsel in a much happier place, which means that you're making good decisions. And then those accommodation conversations, having that integrative process where we sit down and say, what do you need? How can I help you? And how can we still have a successful employment relationship? Because you don't want to let your star players go over something that you may or may not actually need to have for the vaccine.
Yeah, Absolutely. And so I'm currently right now facing a number of continued safety compliance issues with someone I'm working with. And, you know, it just has to do with masks in the workplace more than anything else. And so continuing to enforce a policy for them, this is their prerogative, of keeping masks in the workplace for the foreseeable future in their mind. You know, it's not, you know, for right now. They're looking more along the lines of when, you know, society is more herd immunity, as I just heard somebody say earlier. So, and also to answer the very bottom, the staggered return is what I would recommend with anybody. I mean, you could do it all at once. You could do a staggered return if it's a lot of people you're returning. You know, giving ample notice, a couple weeks, a month, I think is appropriate if you can, obviously for the type of work that they're doing. So.
Yeah, I mean, picking up where Stacey left off too on accommodations, I mean, we're already starting to see claims on this. There are a lot of employers that forgot about the interactive process in this regard. And you may see continued requests to work from home, and that can be an accommodation request. You may see people that are not going to be able to get vaccinated. And again, maintaining PPE in place for their safety may be an accommodation that has to continue, even if all restrictions get removed down the line. But talking about the masking, because that's the thing that was blowing up my phone this morning. I did turn off my video for a second so I could scarf down a little slice of pizza. That's what I was doing. I fess up. I didn't have a chance to, and I forgot breakfast because like I said, my phone was blowing up. Because everybody wants to know, like, oh my gosh, great, Christina, I'm going to take down my masking requirement now for vaccinated people. No, time out. We have a couple of problems. I mean, here in Virginia, we know that we're subject to the Virginia safety COVID standards. They're permanent. They haven't changed. They didn't change overnight in response to the CDC. OSHA didn't change their guidelines in response to the CDC overnight. So those are all very much in play. And so until we start to see those change and shift, there's no reason to change anything just yet. And that hopefully gives us as HR the ability to figure out how we're going to approach this. Because if Stacey and I both work in the same workplace and all of a sudden my employer says, guess what, if you're vaccinated, you don't need to wear your mask anymore. And Stacey shows up tomorrow and she's not wearing her mask and I am, well, I may feel uncomfortable with that. That is potentially a discrimination claim in the making, right? So how you roll this out will be very important, right? We may say, if you're vaccinated, you may choose not to wear your mask. However, please keep in mind that there are people in the workplace who are not vaccinated. So if you'd like, everyone's always welcome to wear their mask if you'd like to do so for the courtesy of your coworkers. It's going to have to be a carefully thought out and carefully relayed policy, in my opinion. And I don't think we want to just jump before looking right now. We've made it this far. You don't want to, this is not the hill we want to die on,
Absolutely. All right. Moving on. So here's some full return challenges that we've actually addressed in some of the presentation about morale issues and things of that nature. So anybody on the panel want to jump on one of these and talk about it a little bit from your experience?
I'll go first on this one. The reluctance and fear has been a big thing for those of us in our workforce that have been 100% telework. It's funny. One of the folks that I work with here in the office was saying, we had somebody return to the workplace very recently. And you remember last summer when we were all very, very nervous, right? We didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't have vaccines yet. The anxiety around being around other people was much, much higher last June than it is today. But we are seeing people who have not been out and about during this event. They are just now walking through that fear that we all walked through before. And so where our first instinct might be like, oh, they're being a little bit extra, we've already normalized this if we have been hybrid in the office. If you've had the luxury of not having a comorbidity and you can go pick up something from the grocery store, right? So everybody's at different places in processing. Childcare is a huge thing for us right now. The providers aren't there like they were before. We've got folks who had in-home care. Those providers aren't offering that anymore. And so for those of us that don't have small humans to say get care, it's not as easily done as it was before. So we're working through a lot of the reluctance and fear as we move into this next phase of, and I don't like to say bringing folks back to work because we never stopped working. I like to say we're normalizing the hybrid model. That's my spin that I'm putting on that. Because there's always been this, the work has to get done, but now we do want to move from not seeing you at all to seeing you some. And so we're just seeing a lot of the reluctance and fear, and perspective has been super helpful to say, okay, but what has been their journey? Where are they at in embracing this thing? And have you already been through that? So be compassionate.
Well, I have a question, Stacey, following up on that to the rest of my co-presenters here. Have you guys done any climate surveys on, how people feel, or how are you guys gauging that from a practical perspective?
I personally have not done a survey. It's a good idea.
Add that to the list. We haven't either. I think we do have a little bit of a pulse on it because we do have people rotating in the office, but we haven't. And I do think, and that was one of the things that I was going to say, is definitely to make sure you understand where your employees are in all of this, and they're all going to be in different places. So being able to communicate ahead of time, to give them time to plan or communicate where they're going to have issues with childcare. For instance, summer is coming, right? And so, kids are getting ready to be out of school, and I personally haven't made, summer childcare plans because I don't know if I'm going to need them or not. But again, as Stacey pointed out, inventory, places to put children, is very limited still at this stage. So, I'm going to need time to make those plans should, I need to start, going back into the office again. And I know lots of people are the same way, or, they haven't made arrangements for vaccinations, maybe because they didn't feel like it was, they weren't leaving their house. So it's not a priority for me. And I'm still nervous about leaving my house. So now, I need time to plan. So understanding, kind of communicating as far in advance what your plans are, and then giving your employees, the grace and the time to, plan for that, or understand where they are in that sort of spectrum. Okay, I'll be there tomorrow, or I don't really know how I'm going to make this work yet, and we need to talk through that.
We have not done a survey, but I will tell you from an employee relations perspective, we have multiple avenues for people to report concerns and complaints. We have an anonymous blog. We've got a 1-800 number. We are getting a lot of, I don't have, what about, isn't it better for you if I don't? Because I won't need an office, So
Right.
that's how we know that there's a concern and that things are afoot. So we've not undertaken an active survey though.
Yeah, no, and Stacey, what you're doing, I think, is what a lot of folks are doing, and I've seen a lot of employers tell me that too. They're making sure too that managers and supervisors are conveying that information that they're hearing directly from their direct reports to HR, to executive level managers, so that that can be all factored in as people are making these return to work plans.
So why remote workforce? So what are the benefits of an actual keeping a remote workforce if you're thinking about bringing it back? And what, as an HR professional, how should you talk to your C-suite about what's the case for a remote workforce? So anybody on the panel want to comment?
I've said this before. I mean, it's sort of, you guys have heard it, is that we see it as a, the hybrid, not the full, 100% telework. We've got some folks that are 100% telework even before the pandemic, but it's very, very, very small percent. We are trying to offer it as a recruitment option, but because we're doing the hybrid and folks are not really open to hoteling workspaces, it's just not something. Somebody's going to leave crumbs on the desk, or somebody's going to have a cold and I don't want to touch their stuff. We just can't even get there. So we're not seeing a lot of people want to do the hoteling. So I don't know if we're going to realize the operating space reduction. I mean, I know, Mike, you said you had your one agency that shut down their headquarters. And so there may be some opportunity for that in other groups, but we are not seeing that. We're going to probably see it as a recruitment, as a hybrid, and we'll probably leave it like in that.
And speaking of that, Stacey, on the one agency that I worked with on lower, it really is that middle, lowering operation costs, less office space needed. They just really looked at, okay, we've got 10 positions. How often do they actually have interactivity with the rest of our organization, face to face? And they found even payroll, HR, no one ever stops by. They always sent an email, or they always wanted to call on the phone instead, because it was so detached from the rest of the organization. So they did some surveys. They figured out that ultimately it was a cost savings. And you may have divisions like that are not necessarily just corporate, but corporate type, administrative type, billing, whatever it is, that would be best to just let them be at home, especially if it's a type of position where, so for instance, in the accounting and finance function, you got to do the work. The money's going to come in. We have to account for it. We have to do the ledger, entries. We have to do all these things that actually, you got to do the financial statements. There's no getting around it. We're going to know if we don't have financial statements next month. So, with that in mind, even if they're at home doing the work still has to get done. They're doing probably the same type of thing they would have done at an actual corporate office. So that was why it's really a no-brainer for this particular client. All right. Any other comments or move on? All right. Let's go to the next slide. So some considerations for a remote workforce. How much of your culture, workplace is already remote, right? And will stay remote, as everyone in the companies, especially management, bought in to remote work. So once again, my example, the CEO really wasn't bought into it. Really liked going to an office, and so it was an idea of the chief operating officer and the CFO kind of convincing that person that it's best to do this. How flexible can you be about work hours? In a healthcare environment, you can't really be that flexible. It's 24 hours care. This is going to be what it is. Do your current methods of communication work for employees who are outside of the office? And are you prepared to invest in the proper software and tools for a long-term type of outside workforce? So really, it just all depends. Any thoughts from the panel?
I think if you're going to go remote, I think it's with like a lot of these things that we're talking about here today, it needs to be well thought out. We all kind of pivoted and we're able to flex and we're able to go remote. But if you're going to plan on doing it long term, now's when you need to make sure, like, do you have your policies in place? How are you going to measure performance? I mean, start really thinking about as you determine, is it a viable solution for you, or is it a necessary solution because you need it in order to be competitive and to keep your workforce happy, but are you have to implement it and it needs to be managed. I mean, I think a lot of that is going to start to come more to the forefront as the threat of COVID starts to recede and this does become more of a long-term scenario. Are you set up to deal with and address the unique things that come up with a remote workforce?
Well said. All right. So, making it successful. Here are some thoughts, ideas in terms of making it successful. Any thoughts from the panel at all about anything? And if there's something that you can think of that, are there any pitfalls that you run into that, you'd say, hey, if we had done this, it probably would have been more successful?
I'll throw in on the workers' comp and the home offices and stuff. One thing that we've been seeing a lot of questions from employers now have been like, well, while we were remote, I had an employee move to Florida. That seems to be the big one, right? I guess everybody's moved down there because there's no personal income tax. That's not a simple answer. People are like, oh, it's fine, right? No, like now we've got tax questions. Now we've got workers' comp questions. What unemployment insurance are you going to be subject to? Have you registered in that state to do business? And it's going to pivot on when we as the employer had knowledge of when the employee went remote to another state. Many states are going to say that we're subject now to that state's laws because we've availed ourselves of hiring someone in that state or working with someone in that state. And that may mean that you require now an addendum to your handbook for your Florida or your California employee. Surprise. Did you, and do you have workers' comp coverage? Like, have you talked to your carrier? Does your carrier know that you've got these a lot of people flexed from the insurance side initially just because it was a pandemic, it was unprecedented. But as you continue to make these more permanent scenarios, like, do you have all this stuff in place? And do you need to be doing anything more? So definitely, again, legal considerations to be thought of.
Yeah, I can't think of another time that the legal paradigm changed more for law or for employment law than the past couple of years. Just in terms of how we handle leave, how we handle, just a remote workforce and things of that nature. So many considerations. So.
Yeah, and I think just looking at everything, I mean, we got sort of in vaccine terms, we've gotten a little bit of emergency use authorization out of some of this, but at some point this is permanent, and you can't blame the pandemic on your policies and procedures anymore, or kind of use that as part of your defense. So it's going to be really important that we sort of look at things without the lens of the pandemic and what your policies and procedures are, and make sure they can stand up again, kind of outside the exception of a pandemic.
All right. So any other challenges? Mental health, flexibility, adaptivity for future changes. Increased demand for work-life balance. One of the things that I've found, at least, is individuals who go from what I've found when we've had people go from the remote work environment back to the actual back on site work environment, that they miss being able to do what they need to do with their kids or on the spot, or whatever it is. And it's sort of a there's almost this, and I'm not saying that people have requested this, but there's almost this need to modify the workplace to give them less hours to where they actually can go home a little bit early and handle some of those things they've gotten used to do over that time. One of the things I would also add to this, and as a challenge that I've seen from a healthcare environment, is a lot of healthcare organizations, there may be some represented on the phone right now, paid hazard pay or some kind of pay to work with COVID positive clients. So what I'm finding is a difficulty now with these clients is rolling that back, having a situation where, okay, someone gets a 30% premium, literally 30-40% premium in some case on what they were making on an hourly basis if they're working with COVID positive clients, or if they're just working in general, just to show up to work because there's such a desperate need for them to come to work and everybody was afraid to come to work, right? To an environment, the expectation is that you're vaccinated. If you are fully vaccinated, you're more safe now. So we're going to knock that down to 20% instead. Okay, now we're going to get rid of it altogether. How do we do that? How do we actually roll that back? Some of these clients, and what I've always recommended in that case is a gradual rollback with an understanding of complete transparency as to why you're doing it. We're doing it because it's not sustainable. You know what I mean? This is not something that we can do for forever, right? Because it does cut in too much. It cuts way too much financially into the numbers to where it's just not a sustainable model for us. And in addition to that, it's a model that because of vaccinations, because of these things, because of the less incidences of sickness, we believe there's a more safe work environment than there was in the past when we had to institute something like this. And so being very transparent and talking about this openly, open memos is a very, very good idea if you have to do something like that. Anybody else? Challenges?
Yeah, I would just pick up on that last bullet. I think, obviously when the dust all settles, and I think once we have started to transition back to what that new normal is going to be for the workplace, for you as an employer, I think making sure not to forget to pick back up those business continuity plans, your contingency plans, your pandemic plans. I'd like to be optimistic. Maybe I'm just the pessimistic defense attorney, but I'd like to say we'd never have to deal with this again. But I just don't know that's going to be the case, right? And so I think now picking the brains of your managers and finding out what worked, what didn't work, what can we do better on, what should we improve on if we have to do this again in the future. I think now is when you do that, when it's all fresh in their minds, and not again where it has to be as reactionary. I think that's one lesson I think a lot of employers have learned.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, Ant's coming on. You know what that means. Nearing the end.
We are almost out of time, but it looks like we have a question from Leanne Old, who is asking for proof of vaccine for the purposes of which CDC quarantine policy must be followed allowed if exposed. Do any of the panelists want to take that one?
I can take it. I guess it's a legal question. No, there's nothing specifically that says we get a free pass to ask about vaccinations or proof of vaccinations based on a desire to follow a CDC guidance or a Dolly guidance here in Virginia. That said, when you cobble it together, you're allowed to ask about vaccination status. You're allowed to ask about for proof. Again, if you need a business purpose. I guess my concern with the way the question is phrased is that I think it's singling out a particular group, right? You're only going to ask about whether or not you've been vaccinated if I come forward and say that I may have been exposed to COVID. We don't know definitively, whether or not COVID long-term is going to be considered a disability. I mean, if you're a long-term sufferer of COVID, I think there's potential for a discrimination claim if it's just that group. So I would say talk to your legal counsel and make sure you develop a strategy about how you're going to ask that so that you don't run into those issues.
Great. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists, Karis, Stacy, Mike, and Christina. Thanks again for your presentation. It was really informative. Thanks to everyone attending. We will have our second part of this series July 14th on ensuring your workplace risks. So please don't forget to sign up for that event. That will be virtual, but then we're looking to do the last two in person, hopefully. So make sure you check out the Hampton Roads Chamber's website and register for those events. Thanks again to Dream Vacations for being our gold sponsor. And I hope everyone has a fabulous weekend. So we will see you next time. See everyone on July 14th. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.